Hello and welcome to this episode of Standing Apart, the podcast about what makes people, businesses and ideas distinctive in a world full of imitation. With me, Nigel. As those of you who have been listening for a while will know, I've just written a book on leadership and management skills. As I was writing it, a nagging doubt kept surfacing. The frameworks I was drawing on, motivational theory, situational leadership, delegation, team behavior, most of them were developed decades ago. But in a world where AI is beginning to undertake some of the work that was done by people, what are human leaders actually for? And how is their role going to change? My guest today has been grappling with that question for longer than most. Johan Roos is a management scholar, entrepreneur, and former leader of several business schools. He co-invented the Lego serious play methodology, a globally adopted approach that uses hands-on construction to unlock thinking in leadership teams and boardrooms worldwide. He is professor and former chief academic officer at Hult International Business School and a senior advisor to the global Peter Drucker Forum. His new book, Human Magic, Leading with Wisdom in the Age of Algorithms, published by Routledge, argues that the real competitive advantage in an age of AI is not technological. It's deeply, irreducibly human. A quick word before we start. It's fair to say that Johan and I could have talked for hours. We didn't have that long, unfortunately, but we did chat enough for 2 episodes. This is part 1. Right, so I am joined this afternoon by Johan. Johan, it's such a delight to have you on the Standing Apart podcast. Can we start by just understanding a little bit about your background?
Hi, Nigel. Thank you for having me on the show. My background is kind of a scholarly practitioner background. I've been sort of a professor for decades in the business of business schools, you could say. Yeah. And I have also served as a leader of institutions in this business as well. A bit large, a little bit smaller, private, public. So I'm sort of a combination of this. And then, of course, as most business schools professor, I do advising work and board work and all of that stuff as well. So that's my background. Currently phased out of all operational responsibilities and enjoying advisory work as well.
Okay. But before we get into talking about your latest book, Human Magic, I was intrigued to understand your background with Lego. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
Well, my background with Lego company is sort of more indirect, but I have worked for them and I have taught their leaders, etc. But I think you are alluding to what's called Lego serious play.
Yeah.
Which is sort of a method that I helped develop and invent actually in the late 1990s, so almost 30 years ago, with a professional friend of mine called Bart Victor, who's now an emeritus in the US. And we did that to solve a particular problem that we faced at that time. He was in leadership, I was in strategy, and sort of we saw that in leadership rooms and boardrooms, the people who had most to contribute were often silent, or said the least, and the strategy conversation sort of rewarded the confident and the analytical over perhaps the wise and the careful. And the answer we felt was to put the thinking into people's hands, and that was sort of the basis for persuading the Lego owner at that time, Mr. Christensen, to let us play with his brand and develop a product for adults, actually, that uses the power of construction, but also the power of shape, size, texture as a language. It turns out it was pretty powerful, and now, 30 years later, thousands and thousands of people in the world are using this. So I'm super happy.
Yeah, it was in fact the first time that I come across that methodology, but I've got lost in a rabbit hole of YouTube, and my finger is hovering over the button to purchase a starter pack of Lego to have a go at that. I'm absolutely intrigued, but let's bring things a little bit up to date. Um, Let's just put a bit of context around this from both of our perspectives. I've just written a book on leadership and management skills, and it launched earlier this year. I was writing it early last year, and there was something niggling away at me in the back of my mind, which is these are skills and techniques that have been, developed over the last 40 or 50 years, some of these things. So, whether we're looking at, motivation, some of the Dan Pink stuff, and then going back to Maslow and, all of this sort of thing, that this nagging doubt in the back of my mind was that, actually, are we entering a world where some of this stuff is just not going to be used anymore? It seems important for me to keep some of this, but I'm not sure how it's going to fit into this current world. And then I read your book, and you're addressing that very problem. So how did you first realize that the world of managing people is going to be fundamentally different, and there's something that needs further investigation?
I wish I could say I had this wonderful dream that this will happen. But sort of since I've been in the trade of higher education for quite some time, and executive education, and really been part of a pretty amazing business school, very dynamic school called Hull, where we change all the time, in a sense. When I was there, I was serving as the chief academic officer. But I remember about 10 years ago, I was working with a group of people, and I set this up in the book as well, if you remember this. A group of leaders was actually top leaders of big European companies, and they were very concerned about this notion of digital transformation.
Yeah.
Right. You remember, this is when everybody had to do kind of evidence-based. There should be zillions of data points. We should have facts, and everything could be do this. And the spreadsheets were glowing. We had Salesforce, and we had all of it, Tableau replaced. There was so much happening here, with the idea that as long as we have the good data here, what happened? And I remember at that time somebody said, well, if the algorithms can tell us this much, what's my job?
Yeah.
And I did write a piece then at that time called Techno-Humanism, in a sense, asking the same question, like what's happening right now when we get sensors and data in all the time. So I had some kind of feeling for this, and we were struggling, of course, to teach and at various levels the right skills to young people. Like what do the employers want? How do you create value after university or college? And we were pretty much at the forefront of that. And we could see there was a lot of technical stuff, and I've always argued for both STEM skills, right? And you can say the humanities as sort of a dual thing. I've written about this for quite some time, that we got to have both. And you could say, with the explosion that came after ChatGPT 3.5 years ago, all of those conundrums and all of these questions I've been going through 10 years ago were just accelerating. It just blasted off. With this new technology, really just enabled people to do so much more, and we just dug into it. And I launched sort of a global implementation of these tools, generative AI, throughout our campuses in Dubai and Boston, London, and San Francisco, 2 months after ChatGPT was launched. Because I had a hunch this is going to be big. I'm old enough to move from the stick to the calculator. But this one was big. I really, this was big and fast. So you could say at the same time, I had a lot of conversation with leaders. I'm heavily involved in what's called Drucker Forum, and I was chairing a big leadership council, or whatever you call it, And I could hear immediately that people starting to talk about efficiency. Like, oh, now we can really replace people and all that. That was a conversation during 2024.
Yeah.
And then in 2025, I started to see people being wary about this, started to see consequences. So one thing led to another that I started in 2025, both to learn the tools quite a lot and use the tools to do things that I hadn't done before, such as using a voice agent to interview people and
Yeah.
all that. But then starting to get the feedback and talking to people about how does this impact you? And already a year ago, you could really feel the impact about people saying, "My God, these truths are so powerful that I feel almost like I'm left to be their servant."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so one thing led to another, and this is what I spent time on in 2025. But in 2024 and 5, I also did research on Lego Serious Play facilitators,
Hmm.
who I believe this is one of the most difficult facilitation techniques. And please use a facilitator when you learn this. This is
Hmm.
because it can be pretty intimidating otherwise. But that is so difficult, and it's so analog, so far from sitting in front of a computer, gathering around the table and getting people to do stuff with their hands and discussing and really driving a good conversation. And I did research on them also in 25 about how they use AI tools before,
Yeah.
during, and after. So all of this came together, and like, wow, I can see here, like, people are risking giving up some of their basic human capabilities here
Yeah.
and replacing that with these magnificent tools.
Hmm.
So that was a long answer to the reasoning behind me, because I could just see, I could feel and see and experience where it was going, Nigel.
Yeah.
And I just felt, wow, we got to hold on to our human magic.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's kind of two sides to this, as I understand it. I mean, there's one is your own personal use of the tools and the technology, and then there's how do you manage people in that are using tools in that way. Um, uh, uh, Tell me about the kind of key pain points you're seeing in both of those areas.
And it's very interesting because I think this is the conversation right now among chief people officers, chief learning and development officer, HR officer, whatever you call them, on various levels. And because they are tasked, of course, with helping the organization to both develop the people, but also sometimes like replace tasks,
Hmm.
right? And I often tell people who are stuck in this a little bit and who get the mandate to say, "Hey, I just met a CFO who said I am going to replace a lot of the tasks with about 120 new agents. And inevitably, some of you will have to be retrained and so forth, but quite a few of you will have to leave."
Hmm.
And this is sort of now, I think, one of the biggest challenge we have. And I recently spent time with about 30 or 40 of such people in great companies, and they're all excited and anxious about
Hmm.
this. So nobody really have the right answers, Nigel, but
Hmm.
or great, there's no single answer, of course, but
Hmm.
I often tell people, just why don't you try shifting your unit of analysis from jobs and people to tasks? Because if
Yeah.
you do that, it sort of changes the conversation a little bit. And a good example is, well, there's plenty of good examples what happens when you do that, because then suddenly you don't scare people. You know, like, oh, some of your task is going to be automated. Fantastic. People start smiling. I
Yeah.
was just with a group of leaders yesterday, and they vouch for this. They say, "Wow, we've been able to pull down from 3 weeks to 19 minutes of things," and people are smiling. I mean, that's the spirit of it, rather than
Yeah.
going around and say the end of the world is near and you will all be fired. That's not
Yeah.
a good change management style, so to
Yeah.
say. So
Yeah. Yeah. I was so the last episode I did was with a lady called Melissa Swift, who had written a book called Effective, and one of her views when it came to AI is that it will make effective people more effective and ineffective people even more ineffective. You got a view on that thought?
Well, it's the classical those who have and those who don't have. Those who do, who don't don't. Those who are in the driving seats, those who are in the passenger seat. So to some extent, I think that is one scenario, and you can think of it all in a in a family, in an organization, in a society, in the world.
Yep.
So of course, with every new technological change that helps improve something, some people will be faster than others. It's just like right now. A good measure is how many young billionaires are we making right now? Quite a few every day, almost, or every week. And these are young people who've understood, who are fast, who are doing. Of course, that's how it is. There is a bell curve.
Yeah.
Most of us are in the middle somewhere, right? But of course, there's a bunch of people on the other end as well. So to some extent, I think she's right. But I'm inherently very optimistic about this. Bad news sells, they say, but I think it's actually in general good news. So I'm very positive, but I always caution people: just be careful. Just be careful. Do all of these things, but just be a little bit careful, because you're finding yourself at this fork, and this semester of the book, as you've seen, like either you use these amazing tools in order to amplify your curiosity, your creativity, your critical thinking, the way you communicate with your body as well, right? And the way you collaborate with people and with agents, you can use this and do this. Or you do the other way around. You find yourself on a soothing, comfortable, slippery slope down towards eroding your jelly bean, your brain muscle.
Yeah.
And it's like taking the elevator, right? That's the most comfortable way. You take the elevator, do it sometimes, but for God's sake, don't forget how to walk the stairs and get some exercise. So it's this tricky balance and message, I think, for all of us, Nigel, for you, for me, for our people, for our families, and everybody, our organizations, but also for society, and I spent decades in higher education. This is a humongous challenge for higher education. Higher education will cope with it, no worries. They may not cope with the pension debt they have in the universities in the UK, but like we will cope with this. There will be stuff. Organizations will cope with it. Some will not, others will not. It's evolving, and the world is going to be better.
Yeah, and it was that element of amplification versus erosion that it kind of really hooked me into your narrative. And it's a choice, right? I think one of the things that I did your little kind of self-assessment test in the first chapter. So but perhaps if you can remember a couple of those questions off the top of your head, you can you can go through a few of those. I think when I was assessing myself, I felt quite good about the way I was using it, but equally every day I come across people who are using it in an eroding way. So perhaps we could just tap into that a little bit.
Well, the one that is really easy, or I think pretty bad, it's actually the first I put in the intro chapter. This whole idea about where are you on quick answers, in a sense, or more reflective stuff, or deeper questions, and I play with it a lot, because you know how easy it is now you ask a question, you get an answer, wham, bang, fast, super good, often superbly good answer, because these machines know everything now. Right?
Yeah.
But so the problem is, in a sense, how often do you take the effort now these days to sit down and frame and really think through the question before you ask it? And you could say, well, I always do that, or well, often, or increasingly rarely. And that's sort of just an indicator, because it's so soothing, so nice, so easy to sort of stop thinking, but just immediately rush into it. It's this idea of holding perplexity in your mind for a while.
Yeah.
This idea of not rushing to answers. I think that is one out of many indicators of, in a sense, is AI replacing your spark of inquiry?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's one. And then, of course, another one that I really like is this whole idea about how often do you ask because? What is the because, or why?
Yeah. Yeah.
Why? This is the essence of critical thinking. Like you're skeptical. I call it
Yeah.
algorithmic skepticism. But this is what we should teach our kids and universities and every day, like, to be critical in
Yeah.
our thinking. It goes
Yeah.
back to the Enlightenment, to the Renaissance of the whole idea of being, enlightened, to be free from the dogma of the authorities, like the king and the church and all that. This that you are so aware, so knowledgeable, able to ask questions because you've seen various perspectives, that you actually don't believe in dogma. That's what it was called at that time. Today, what do we call it? Fake news.
Yeah.
Or deep fakes. And it's getting increasingly more difficult to cultivate your critical thinking. And this is, in a sense, why I have a whole chapter on this whole idea about skepticism, and the easy tool is to pick apart arguments. Like I'm using the old English philosopher Stephen Toulmin's old model from 75 years ago on mapping an argument. Like what are the grounds for what you claim, and what's your assumptions or warrants for it, and how do you qualify it, and how can you rebut it? All of that is good debate. So these self-assessment questions are a little bit superficial, but it's just to give an indication of what can be done. And I'm currently working on a big operationalizing of those models, getting more questions and deeper questions to indicate where you're going.
Okay.
On this.
Yeah, very, very cool. I find that when I am interacting with an AI, the thing that I most not only think is most effective, but also that I enjoy the most, is when I effectively have the germ of an idea and then I'm knocking it around with the AI.
Yes.
So I'm not asking a question. I'm not asking it to give me an answer. I'm saying, I've got some thoughts about this. What questions might you ask me about this idea? And then we go off on certain rabbit holes, but it's always, in those situations, it's always me guiding the conversation, not the AI. And you can get lost for a couple of hours in that. But once you've gone down a few rabbit holes and then backed up and reached some conclusions that you get it to remember or whatever, and then we'll do a really nice summary of your conclusions. And that I have found is an amplification, to use your term.
Yes. No, and I would not have expected anything else of you, Nigel. But we can go out and ask some younger citizens about how they use these tools now. I'm not talking about the addiction to TikTok or Instagram or anything, but rather, how do you use a tool now when you have basically a friend, or you have a friend in your mobile, in your device, that you can speak with, and it speaks back to you. And in fact, it will say, "What a great idea. You're such a wonderful person." These tech pros are not stupid. They know human psychology, and they know how to make us addicted to this. And we love it. Nigel, you probably experience as well when some of these LLMs say, "Oh, great comment, Nigel. Great question." And that is, of course, the extra layer to make. This is psychological. We feel good about it, so we want to do more. So we want to consume more tokens and more energy, and we will ask another question. So all of this is well, and this is, I think, how we should use it to amplify it. When we have a hunch, we do this. What I'm urging people to do is just be careful. Maybe you don't wake up and have a coffee and sit immediately and start to do this, but rather you sit and think a little bit about nature or whatever, or your family, or what's up, what did you experience, what did I dream about, so you don't immediately just go into this. And then maybe 5 minutes every day you don't, or a Friday afternoon you take with your team an hour with no devices and just talk through. What did you experience? What did you feel when you presented this? What was sort of inside you? What signals did you feel from the others? And start to look at this beautifulness of embodied experience, of which LSP is, of course, one thing. But this whole idea that we speak with our bodies, we detect micro wrinkles in each other's face, and we cough, and we do this, and we present, and we use our hands and arms. That there's so much here, in a sense, that takes a little bit more of time for our brain to process. Rather than just like getting all these extraordinary amount of papers and text and videos and stuff into our mind, that could be a little bit overwhelming and actually erode some of our capacity that we have. That's the only thing I'm saying. I'm not saying it has to, but just be careful.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to wrap up our conversation for this episode. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with our next installment of this conversation. One of the things I enjoy most about hosting this podcast is stumbling across a book or a guest that arrives at exactly the right moment. Johan and his book Human Magic did that for me. I came to this conversation with a genuine anxiety, one I suspect quite a few of you share. I've spent the past 10 years or so teaching and writing about leadership skills that took decades to properly understand. With the speed at which AI is changing the world of work, I've been asking myself whether any of that still matters. What Johan gave me wasn't necessarily reassurance, it was actually something more useful, a framework for thinking about it clearly. His central observation is that every professional now faces a daily choice. Either you use AI to amplify your curiosity, your judgment, and your critical thinking, or you allow it to erode these capabilities through what he calls cognitive offloading. The amplification curve or the erosion curve, and it's not one big decision, it's hundreds of small ones every day. The thing that landed hardest for me was his question about how we interact with AI. When you reach for an answer, do you actually think through the question first? Or do you just type and wait? That sounds trivial, but it isn't. It's the difference between using a tool and being used by one. I also found his practical advice strikingly simple. Resist the impulse to reach for AI first thing in the morning. Take time with your team away from devices. Just conversations about what you've experienced, what you felt, what you noticed in others. Not because it's a nice thing to do, but because it keeps your human judgment sharp. The erosion curve has a very enticing and comfortable draw, and I guess that's rather the point. And the first step to avoiding it is just being aware that it exists. We'll pick up the second part of this conversation in a fortnight. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. That's almost it for this episode. If you found yourself asking whether you're on the amplification curve or the erosion curve, then Johan's book is well worth picking up. I'll put a link in the show notes. We'll be back in a fortnight with the second part of this conversation, and in some ways it's the sharper half. We get into the 5 human capabilities that Johan argues AI simply cannot replicate. What the role of leaders actually looks like in organizations deploying AI at pace, and what he calls practical wisdom, the meta capability that underpins all the others. Do make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. All past episodes are still available, so have a browse whenever you're ready. And if this episode gave you something useful, do someone a favor and tell somebody about it. Until next time, whatever you do, stand apart from the crowd. Standing Apart is a Sun Bear Consulting production.